to the New Conversation. I'm Dwight McBride, president of the New School. At the New School, we believe in the power of thoughtful and critical dialogue. This series, where I talk to notable people and thought leaders from the art world, academia, activists, and cultural and political influencers, is just one of the ways in which we are highlighting, in a distinctly New School way, the importance and the power of conversation in a democracy. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can catch future episodes there. You can also follow me on Twitter at Dwight A. McBride, and you can like us on Facebook at TNS President. Today's guest is my good friend, longtime and distinguished colleague in African American studies and in higher education, and the president of Rutgers University, Dr. Jonathan Holloway. Dr. Holloway is a brilliant author, historian, and academic leader whose leadership roles have included serving as provost at Northwestern University and dean of Yale College at Yale University. Among the many things that we have in common, we both have the distinction of being the first Black presidents of our respective campuses, and we both began our respective PhD programs the same year, Jonathan at Yale and me at UCLA, and we first met each other that very year at the Conference of Ford Fellows. We've been friends ever since. We also share an unusual bond. We both began our roles as provost during the same year, he at Northwestern, me at Emory, and we both began our presidencies amid the COVID-19 pandemic, which has made for highly unusual and challenging first years in these new roles, to say the very least. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here, my friend.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
How you're doing? I mean, this has been a hard first year, a hard beginning for a new presidency. How are you doing this year?
I'm doing okay. I was asked by my board chair back in November, just during a regular phone call, if I was having fun. And there was an awkward silence. I mean, a long one. And I said, well, I have no regrets. And he goes, okay, I'm glad to hear that. And I said, I don't know anybody in higher ed who's having fun right now.
Yeah.
And that's just the truth. I mean, it's just one difficult thing after another. I do know that when I was announced in end of January 21st, the presidency looked a certain way. And within 6 weeks, it looked really different. And I felt I mourned the presidency I never got to enjoy and took it very personally for about 24 or 48 hours. And then I grew up a little bit. I'm like, this is not about you, Jonathan. This virus does not care about you.
No.
This is everybody. And then I started to adjust my mindset. So I'm doing okay.
I took about 2 weeks of mourning. But very similar process. It's certainly been unlike anything I've ever experienced in my life. But like you, I don't think I have any regrets about it either.
Yeah.
Well, listen, tell me a little bit about, this is a question I ask everybody that sits in this chair. Tell me how you knew that you were going to be an academic.
Oh, well, for me, that really is a pretty simple answer. It was 6 weeks before I graduated in June. So in April of 1989. And I can pinpoint that because it was 6 weeks before I graduated college. And I was doing an honors thesis with somebody who was visiting at Stanford that year, someone I just really come to really adore, starting in the fall quarter. And I had scratched everything else off the list. I mean, orthopedic surgeon, that lasted 6 weeks of college. Then corporate attorney, not that I knew what that was, that lasted most of college. And then I realized I didn't want to do that. And public affairs, public policy, education, like don't have the skills or don't have the interest. And I was lost. And this professor, 6 weeks before I graduated, pulled me aside and asked me my plans. And he said, have you thought about getting a PhD in history? And I recoiled like, no. What a preposterous idea. And he said, I want you to think about it and let's have lunch and I'll tell you why. And so we sat down and had lunch. And Dwight, he and I were exchanging emails 2 weeks ago. I mean, it has been, what is that, 32 years this June.
Wow.
And we have stayed in touch. So it wasn't my idea. He saw something in me. And then I followed his advice. I did have a year fellowship in public policy that I sort of fell into. And during that summer before the fellowship began, I was doing prep courses and things like that and getting my head together. And within a month of being in this public policy fellowship, I mean, I grew up in the DC area, lobbyist kid. This is sort of a logical thing. Within a month, I'm like, this is not my world. I need to be on a campus. And that's when I knew. Someone else knew before me, but that's when I knew. And then within a month of starting graduate school, probably about 2 months before you and I met.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a second, this is way more interesting than I thought it was. Hard, super hard for me, but like, this feels like it might be right. And I was off and running.
As you think about this work that you've been called to do right now as a president of a university, it's still hard for me to believe that both of us are in these roles. I feel like, they're all of a sudden we're the grown-ups. One of the things you're supposed to do as a president is you're supposed to be externally facing. You're supposed to be out meeting people, out building partnerships, building friendships for the university, building relationships, getting to know people, and even inside the community, getting to know people on campus. It's just been a big challenge, the pandemic, to how to start a presidency in this way. How have you been doing that with everything being on Zoom? How have you translated that into this moment of the pandemic?
The question will be what happens after. I mean, once we return, when I can go out and meet the people, when I can do things, I will, in a weird way, I will have less contact with people because, and I'm doing like town halls with 1,000 people signed up.
Yeah.
And the chance of doing that it's going to be much more difficult to pull off something like that in the future. So we'll see. I think there has to be a healthy sense of not humor, but bemusement. It's like, okay, just bring on whatever the next thing is. we'll just adjust, duck, roll, and what is it?
Stop, drop, and roll. That's it.
Stop, drop, and roll. Get up and like, okay, what's the next one?
One of the big challenges certainly has been what it is to lead in moments of radical ambiguity. Just where you literally don't. There's no playbook for this, and all of us have been a part of this incredibly grand experiment. I think once we get some distance on it, to your point, I think there is a lot we're going to learn, and some things that we may take into a new normal with us that are actually going to make how we function and how we work even better. I'm hopeful of that. If you think about this last year, writ large, the pandemic, historic elections, incredible racial reckoning in the nation, how have those sort of larger forces made you think differently about the role of college and university presidents in society?
I believe that there was a time when people looked to higher ed leaders for suggestions, for ideas, for sort of leadership from a place of values, whether it was shared values or not.
Yeah.
And what we've seen over the course of our careers is the job of being president or chancellor getting more and more complicated, because whether it's from different sets of federal demands that are about good things, about like Title IX or the care of a community, whether it's about alumni who, as public institutions especially, have to lean on private sources of funding more than states. Alumni expecting, well, if I'm giving you this money, I want to say in a new kind of way. It's been more difficult in the very best way because so many of our places are becoming more demographically representative of the country, which means it's harder to hold a set of common experiences in one place because there's so many other kinds of experiences. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, the way that social media has been used, to raise the set of expectations about how long an administration gets to answer a question or solve a problem. Like you get 20 seconds, right? Which is just leads to bad decisions. So you take all these things together, the job has become so fractured that I think it's really difficult for university presidents to say, wait, like just wait. We're all going to take a breath. There's an important thing you need to know, and I'm going to say it. And I just think it's, and it may just be that we've reached a point that will allow, that there's so many things going on. Things are so fractured that we can snap back to an old-fashioned way. Again, romanticizing, I'm sure, but an old-fashioned way of saying, we all need to slow down a second. We need to recognize that we share more in common than we actually are taught to believe. Mm-hmm. And once we recognize that we shared these things, what are we going to do about it? And I mean, I just think that's one of the roles of higher ed leaders. And it takes a certain, I don't know if the word is bravery. I think it may be a mixture of bravery, recklessness, self-confidence. I don't know what it is, but I think that higher ed leaders who, like a university president who loves being university president, is going to have a hard time stepping up to that task.
Yeah.
The university president who says, I can be a force for a positive change, a new conversation, which may be brave, reckless, or confident. I don't know what the word is. That's the space I want higher ed leaders to occupy.
I've often thought that these jobs are in some ways best done by people who have a bit of ambivalence about them.
Yes, absolutely.
And for reasons that are very similar to what you've articulated. As you think about sort of the future of higher ed, especially emerging from this pandemic, and I am beginning to get hopeful, like I think a lot of people are, about emerging and building towards something that'll look like a new normal for all of us. What are the bigger questions for higher ed institutions? And as you think about that through the lens of your presidency at Rutgers, specifically, what are the things that are beginning to emerge as a part of the legacy you hope to leave at Rutgers for your time there?
One of our reasons to exist is to serve the state of New Jersey in Rutgers. Yeah. Now, we serve the nation and the world, but our first response is to serve the state of New Jersey. And so the question is, how are we going to, as we emerge, what things have we discovered while we've been submerged that are impediment to getting access to a place like Rutgers? And, you know, it's the digital divide, for instance. We've known about it, but the extent of it within the state of New Jersey has been eye-opening in terms of the students who maybe are commuter students who, when they go home, they have no way to access, remotely the campus, or their computer is their phone, and that's, and they don't have the means to actually have other ways of accessing things. So these are things that I think individuals, groups knew about, but now the virus has cast a bright light. Okay, how are we going to deliver our education? And then who should be receiving it? I mean, presuming they're academically qualified, the virus has displayed the financial fragility of a lot of people who would be part of Rutgers' applicant pool. How do we make it affordable, or how do we structure it in a way that they can process through their undergraduate experience at a very responsible, reasonable clip, so it doesn't just string them out. So there's a lot of things we have to ask now, and as we talked about earlier, there's going to have to be some merger of the in-person and the remote going forward in order to facilitate the success of our students and the delivery of our education. And one of the things I charged my chief academic officer to do is to think about the things we learned how to do well, or the things we did horribly, but we can learn from during, in terms of remote access, And how can we leverage that to identify new populations who otherwise wouldn't think that Rutgers is a place they could do their work, or they can't do school full time? Like, how can we leverage our online teaching capacity?
It won't surprise you to hear that, given certainly the important differences there are between our campuses, some of the concerns are actually very similar, because we too are asking very similar questions about the future of how we provide a greater sense of access, how we do that in a way that also is not cost prohibitive for certain populations, and the different modes in which we deliver education as well. I want to talk a little bit about your academic work and you as an academic. And you just managed, in the context of an incredibly busy life, while you were provost at Northwestern, moving into being president at Rutgers, to release a new book, which makes me extremely jealous.
I'm so sorry.
Making the rest of us look bad. But it's the book is called The Cause of Freedom, A Concise History of African Americans. And I'd love to hear you say a bit more about it. Maybe talk a little bit about the genesis of the project, and having not quite finished it yet, but started in the last couple of days. I also would love to hear a little bit about how you think it speaks to this current moment, because I really do think it does in some powerful ways.
So thank you. A few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I was approached about, would I consider, would I consider pitching a book idea to Oxford University Press, that's who published it, to do a short history of African Americans. I'm like, well, at that point, I was dean of Yale College, I was about to become provost at Northwestern. I'm like, I don't really have much in the way of time for these things. Oh, no, this is a very short book. And this back and forth went on for months, every so often. And I was intrigued, but it seemed impossible.
Yeah.
And clearly the editor was effective, because finally, maybe she played to my ego. I don't recall anymore. I finally said yes. And I rationalized it because, I'm sorry, I missed a key point. The thing that almost broke it, I'm like, okay, let me think about this. Because I'd been giving my post-emancipation African American history course lecture basically for 15, 16 years at that point. I knew it cold. And so I said, so just to be clear, this is a post-emancipation survey. But she goes, no, not post-emancipation, only all of it. I'm like, well, that's just absurd. There's no way to capture more than 400 years of history in 125 pages. Right. There's just no way. And she invited me to think of the project in different kinds of ways, not be a historian who's trying to delineate this, then this, then this, but expansively. The last thing I'll say on this is that I still was overwriting. I mean, I'm like, well, I can't not talk about this. But then that was the key. Once I had that moment, I'm like, wait, the project, Jonathan, is not about what you include, but what you don't include, and figuring out the rationale to not include things.
And also what I found so powerful is you tell a story. I mean, you really do center the book by asking 2 or 3 interrelated questions, right, that kind of become the arc of the story you tell about African American history, right?
Yes.
Which is in many ways, because I was daunted by the idea, like when a concise history of African American, that in and of itself is a daunting idea. Concise, really?
It's absurd. Yeah.
But what you've done is, in many ways, what I used to do when I taught the early American literature survey, right, course, is I didn't think about it as needing to teach everything about the evolution of, America, right? But instead, I wanted to look at the production of the idea of what we now understand as America.
Exactly.
And if you sort of reverse engineer from there is a story to tell, right? And that's what you managed to do here by asking, what is citizenship, right? What does that mean to African Americans in the context of this history that we've had in this country? Those questions are the ones that really, to me, I think allow you to create this extraordinarily compelling story in this book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate a close reader reading my book back to me. But the thing is, it's true. I mean, if in our lecture courses, and you're lecturing, I'm lecturing, I mean, I'll personalize it. I knew that not everyone was going to become an African Americanist historian. Right. I knew not everybody was going to become a historian. But it was my job to make sure they all left with a heightened ability to think critically, to read critically, and to write critically. And so for me, learning those skills, the vehicle through which they're going to learn it was, for my course, the post-emancipation African American experience. Mm-hmm. And so when I thought of this book, once I was stuck. I was stuck for probably a year before I figured out, okay, now I can imagine a new way forward. And it was about telling a story, but giving them ostensibly give the reader a simple question. What does it mean to be American? Well, that's an easy thing to answer. I'm like,
Is it?
Yeah. If you look at the African American experience as one example, you'll recognize very quickly that answer is really complicated.
Yeah.
And the process of answering that question, you'll learn how people express what it means to be American, like today, for example. Mm-hmm. When I look at the insurrection at the Capitol, the new rise, articulation of domestic extremist groups and white nationalist groups, they are telling us on a regular basis what they think it means to be an American.
Absolutely.
And we know what that narrative is. So the book, I think, is a sobering call to think carefully about citizenship, Americanness, humanity, and we're wrestling with that a lot these days.
You've spent a lot of time, thinking about post-emancipation American and African American history. You spent a lot of time thinking about the civil rights era. As you were watching what was happening this past summer in the country, and even into the January 6th attack on the Capitol, are there parallels that you observed between what's happening now and the civil rights era protest, or is there something about the kind of protest happening now that feels and even in character is different from that era?
I just want to pause for a second. It's a great question. But think about that phrase, the attack on the Capitol.
It's extraordinary. I've said to many, many, many people, I know I have not sufficiently had time to really process that.
Yes.
Because it's something that it was unimaginable to me.
It was unimaginable. Yeah. So when you asked about what is old and what is new, I think we saw played out a lot of sort of what I'll call viral fantasies that are very old about, who was a threat to the Republic, who needed to be controlled. In this case, it's, from the Proud Boys perspective, liberals/socialists, racial apologists, all of these things that we know.
Right.
And that is not new. That is as old as the country itself.
Right.
What is new, as we know, is that the scaling up, the ability to scale up one's organizing ability is never existed like this before. And the ways in which one can scale up through media platforms that are not even hiding in plain sight. They're just, any person can stumble across this stuff.
That's right.
Any 9-year-old can stumble across this stuff. That's new and deeply unsettling. And, there's always going to be people who are prone to fantasize in all kinds of, not fantasize isn't the right word, to conspiracy theories, which are fantasies. And, there's always going to be those kinds of people. But now they can find one another with great ease, and they can organize a protest in minutes. That's different.
Yeah.
What's also different, which I find actually quite comical, in gallows humor, is seemingly the surprise that a lot of people had who raided the Capitol, that the thing that they used to organize themselves would be turned against them as screenshots, or screen grabs, and people, family members, co-workers saying, "That's Joe Smith." And then calling federal authorities, like, "How'd you know I was there?" I'm like, "Your phone tracks you it's just so that the newness is the ability to organize in a radical way and the ability to surveil in a new way.
I still get rendered quite speechless about it. I know I'm going to need time to really work through it, because if we all just step back 4 years ago, right, in time, it would have been unimaginable to even think that the peaceful transfer of power would be a phrase that would be in contestation.
Yes.
Right? Like it was as normative as breathing air, right? And so to even have gone through what we've gone through with the just completely unprecedented nature of this presidency in every way, upending the role of media, upending peaceful transfer of power, upending the sense of America as a diverse nation, right? All of that has really been a part of the legacy of the last 4 years. And my big worry is not so much our former president. My big worry is the forces that it has unleashed in the nation, and that nearly half of the people who voted in the electorate thought this was a good idea.
Yep.
That's the part we have to live with. And so how to come back from that, how we create, once again, an important and necessary space for civil discourse in the context of a mature democracy. What is the role of universities and university leaders? What role do we have in that work?
I think we have an outsized role right now, to be honest. And one, even though it is so popular to take pot shots at higher education, university presidents, so many of our institutional leaders still recognize the importance of universities as a testing ground, a proving ground, network ground, whatever it is. University presidents need to step up, frankly, and need to be a bit unafraid. And I will date myself. It's not like I'm new to this.
Yeah.
I'm new to the presidency, yes. But I'm not new to the idea of the role of higher education. I'm not new to the notion that there's a value principle behind just the idea of higher education, of critical inquiry, that we must protect at all cost. And this is not about my personal political views. I think are actually deeply irrelevant to my job.
I couldn't agree more.
And
though everyone is interested in them,
yes, they are.
Agree more. Yeah.
I just come out and tell people, look, I'm an unabashed liberal, but it's irrelevant to my job as president. And it's been very odd for me, it hasn't happened yet at Rutgers, but it will. At Northwestern, at Yale, conservative students really came to like me a lot. I'm like, man, but we disagree on so many things.
Yeah.
But they knew I would listen to them. And I would respect their right to have these ideas. And we would push back, And the fact is, they are our students as well. Where liberal students thought I was going to change the world. I'm like, no. I'm going to make changes, certainly. They'll align with my personal philosophy, and which is informed by my own sense of politics, of course. But, this world is complex. And the more we wrestle with the complexity, the better you learn how to defend your own ideas because you're being challenged, the better off you're going to be.
My friend, I think that there are plenty of other things I want to talk about, but we have a lifetime for that. I think we're going to leave it right there because that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for taking the time today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.